Hi, this video is a plot summary of William Shakespeare's play Othello. I'll cover the main characters and events. This play is one of Shakespeare's tragedies. A Shakespearean tragedy is the story of a heroic figure whose major character flaws cause the story to end with this character's downfall. Now, these character flaws in Othello, as in Shakespeare's other tragedies, are made worse by external pressures acting on the main character. Typically, in tragedy, the protagonist recognises his mistakes, but only once it's too late. In Othello, a well-respected general is manipulated by one of his most trusted officers. The officer, Iago, is angry at being overlooked for a promotion. He plots, schemes, lies and manipulates to overthrow Othello, using Othello's character flaws against him. In the end, through rumours, paranoia and misinformation, Othello murders Desdemona, his wife, believing she's been unfaithful to him. After learning the truth, that she has not been, Othello kills himself. Let's move over here to take a quick look at the main characters. So we'll start with Othello. He's the main character. He's the play's protagonist and our tragic hero. He's a well-respected general and soldier who's admired by those at the very top of society, as well as those he works with and commands. The audience quickly learns to like and admire him when we hear of his deeds, his ability as a military commander, and his dignified and noble characteristics. Right, now we've got Iago. This is the play's villain. In the opening scene, Iago discloses his hatred for Othello straight away. He's one of Othello's officers, an ensign, which is one of the lowest ranks of officer. He's angry that Othello has promoted Cassio, another officer, instead of him. Throughout the play, Iago pretends to be a friend to Othello, all the time lying to him and manipulating other characters to ultimately bring about Othello's destruction. Although Iago gives his reasons straight away, Iago's motivation for bringing such suffering and destruction not only on Othello but on the innocent Desdemona cannot be easily explained. His crimes also extend to murder and exploitation, making him one of Shakespeare's most devious and unpleasant villains. Let's have a look at Desdemona. Desdemona is Othello's new wife and the daughter of Brabantio, who's a Venetian senator. A senator is a politician. She ends up as the innocent victim of Iago's mission to destroy Othello. Iago manages to convince Othello that she has been unfaithful to him. Enraged by Iago's lies, Othello kills her out of jealousy. Now, Cassio, this is one of Othello's officers. Othello promoted him to the rank of lieutenant instead of Iago. This made Iago angry and jealous, and he tells us that he hates them both. Using Cassio's youth and good looks against him, Iago manages to convince Othello over the course of the play that Cassio and Desdemona have had an affair. Another character we should mention here is Rodrigo. He's a gullible character who Iago manipulates. Rodrigo is the character that Iago is having a discussion with at the beginning of the play, where Iago reveals his spite and hatred. Rodrigo's in love with Desdemona, something which Iago uses to manipulate him in his plot to destroy Othello. Just a little note here on Brabantio. He's Desdemona's father. As we've said, he's a senator, that's an elected politician, and he's offended that his daughter married Othello in secret and without his permission. We've then got Emilia. This is Iago's wife and Desdemona's attendant. She's used by Iago to set up a meeting between Desdemona and Cassio, something that Iago uses as evidence to convince Othello that they're in a relationship. She also gives Desdemona's handkerchief to Iago, an item which is also used as evidence of Desdemona and Cassio's affair. Now, let's get on with the overview of the plot. The play opens on the streets of Venice. Iago and Rodrigo are talking, and Rodrigo is very unhappy that he's been paying Iago to help him win Desdemona's hand in marriage. He has learned that Desdemona has, that night, married Othello. Knowing Desdemona's father, Brabantio, would be very unhappy about this, they call up to Brabantio's window, rousing him from his sleep, and tell him that his daughter has been stolen by Othello. Brabantio, alarmed by this, gathers his men to capture Othello and take him to the Duke of Venice. Meanwhile, Cassio tells Othello that he has been summoned by the Duke of Venice on an urgent matter. On his way there, Brabantio and his men stop Othello and, with weapons drawn, accuse him of stealing Desdemona by witchcraft. Calm yet assertive, Othello goes with Brabantio to the Duke. We find out that a Turkish fleet of the Ottoman Empire, a military rival to Venice at the time, is threatening to invade the Venetian outpost of Cyprus. Upon arriving, we find out that Othello was summoned to lead the Venetian military response. Having arrived with Othello, Brabantio accuses him of stealing his daughter through witchcraft. Othello eloquently defends himself. Desdemona enters and further defends her own choice to marry Othello. The Duke and the other senators are satisfied with Othello and Desdemona's case and dismiss Brabantio's concerns. Against the background of war, Othello and his officers depart for Cyprus, with Desdemona accompanying her new husband. The play then shifts to Cyprus. As Othello and his soldiers arrive, we find out that the Turkish fleet has been destroyed in a storm and the military threat has gone. A celebration is planned for that evening. Now, let's just move over here because most of the action in Othello now focuses on the character's social interactions and Iago's manipulation. Othello's downfall is achieved through a variety of behaviours demonstrated by Iago, a constant drip feed of insinuation and misinformation at Othello's ear, orchestrated events, planted evidence, and his taking advantage of unfortunate coincidence and circumstance, and his feigned loyalty to others. Iago's first orchestration comes during the celebration. Knowing Cassio cannot handle his drink, Iago plans to get Cassio drunk and convinces Rodrigo to start a fight with him. When Rodrigo provokes Cassio at the celebration, a fight ensues, and in the drunken confusion, Cassio injures the governor of Cyprus, Montano. When Othello arrives after the alarm is raised, he strips Cassio of his rank in disgrace after Iago, who's pretending to be reluctant, tells him what happened. Cassio's devastated by what has happened. Iago, pretending to be a friend, convinces Cassio that the way to get his rank back is to get Desdemona to argue his case. He agrees to get Othello out of the way so that Cassio may have a private discussion with Desdemona. Of course, Iago wants to use this meeting between Cassio and Desdemona to convince Othello that those two are having an affair. Sure enough, Othello and Iago leave to check the town's fortifications, and Cassio's alone with Desdemona. She's sympathetic to his request and agrees to do everything she can to convince Othello to reinstate his position. This plays into Iago's hands in two ways. The first is that when Othello and Iago return, Iago points out that Cassio has just parted company with Desdemona, with the aim of planting the first seeds of jealousy in Othello's mind. Further, Desdemona's subsequent entreaties to Othello on Cassio's behalf almost immediately adds conviction to this idea that they're having an affair. Right, we need to now look at this handkerchief, so we'll do a separate section on this. I'll just put up here the handkerchief. Right, Iago's cause is furthered when he comes into possession of Desdemona's handkerchief by way of his wife Emilia, who's Desdemona's attendant. An attendant is a kind of servant and companion. And the significance of this handkerchief is that it was the first gift that Othello gave to Desdemona. It later serves as the hard evidence Othello demands that his wife has been unfaithful. Iago tells him that he has seen Cassio wipe his beard with a handkerchief of its description. Not only that, when Othello demands of Desdemona that he sees the handkerchief, she protests that she cannot find it, and then unfortunately she once again entreats Othello on Cassio's behalf. Othello is sent into a rage. Now, Cassio later remarks on being unable to account for such a handkerchief being found in his room. It was probably planted by Iago. He gives this to Bianca, a prostitute he favours, to copy the embroidery. At one point, Othello becomes so consumed with rage that he falls into a trance or a fit. Iago takes this opportunity to quickly arrange for him and Cassio to meet and talk. When Othello returns to consciousness, Iago tells him to observe the coming meeting between him and Cassio. He gets Cassio to talk of Bianca, causing lewd laughter and further confirmation in Othello's eyes that Cassio and Desdemona are having an affair. By another unfortunate chance, Bianca happens upon this scene with the handkerchief, railing against Cassio for asking her to copy the embroidery of a token given to him by another woman. At this point, Othello's utterly convinced of Desdemona's unfaithfulness. He calls her a whore, ignoring her pleas of innocence. He ominously tells Desdemona to wait for him alone in bed that night without her attendant Emilia. So as the play reaches its unhappy conclusion, a message comes from Venice instructing the return of Othello. Iago convinces Rodrigo to ambush and kill Cassio that night. However, the attempt fails and Cassio wounds Rodrigo. Cassio is also wounded by an unseen Iago who escapes. Iago returns and murders Rodrigo in a feigned rage. Meanwhile, Othello stands over Desdemona in her room. She wakes, pleads with him, and again protests her innocence, but to no avail. Othello smothers her. Emilia then enters with news of Rodrigo's death and sees her dying mistress before her. In her last few breaths, Desdemona says she has killed herself, but after she dies, Othello confesses. He explains that his actions were based on information from Iago. Others, including Montano and Iago, enter the room. When Othello insists that Iago has told him the truth using the handkerchief as evidence, Emilia realises what her husband, that's Iago, has done. When she confesses that she gave the handkerchief to Iago, Othello realises that he has been tricked. Iago tries to silence his wife, then kills her and attempts to escape. When he is caught and brought back in, Othello attempts to kill him but is disarmed. Othello makes a short speech on how he wants to be remembered, and then, with a knife hidden on his person, he kills himself. Lodovico ends the play, ordering that Iago is executed. That's the overall summary of the play. I'll be doing more videos on Othello, giving you some language analysis and a closer look at key scenes. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.